The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker was released on the Nintendo GameCube in the spring of 2003. I say this not because it is a particularly interesting or novel opening sentence, but because I think it is essential to stress that this game is over 20 years old. It's an objective fact that The Wind Waker is more visually pleasing than just about every single one of its contemporaries, not to mention the vast majority of games released in its wake. It's hard to believe, but the timeless cel-shaded art style Nintendo perfected here actually attracted a fair bit of backlash at its reveal. Many fans, enraptured by the darker, more realistic take on the series promised by the now iconic Space World 2000 tech demo, saw Wind Waker's kiddie cartoon aesthetic as a regression. Nintendo ultimately had the last laugh, and has firmly proven the superiority of inspired artistic direction over raw graphical realism. The game did receive a remaster in 2013, but simply put, there was zero visual imperative. What you are seeing now is the original release, albeit upscaled for modern displays. It's jaw-droppingly gorgeous with an enduring style that remains as fresh and resonant today as it did all those years ago. I feel silly voicing this out loud, but the particular deep blue hue of the Great Sea is one of the most memorable aspects of Wind Waker to me, and when coupled with such an irresistibly catchy tune, ensures that I never skip this little opening movie. I'm eager to dive into the game proper, I hope you are too, but I felt it important to dedicate a moment of appreciation to the game's exceedingly charming presentation. Wind Waker's greatest strength is in effortlessly imparting a cheerful mood to the player through its aesthetics, both visual and auditory. My focus here is analyzing the game's structure and mechanics, so I'll attempt to refrain from dwelling on the impeccable vibes, but trust that they are never far from my mind when playing. I do have my issues with Wind Waker, but none of those are with its artistic style, which I consider to be the foundational element to the game's identity and appeal. Don't get it twisted, such masterful presentation is a constant source of joy when playing. Personally, I prefer games to jump to the action quickly, but Wind Waker's opening exposition is crucial to the impact of its story. I dare not skip over it. The triumphant retelling of fan-favorite Ocarina of Time takes a darker turn when the unfortunate aftermath of Link's time travel is revealed. Somehow, Ganondorf returned. With Hyrule once again threatened, there remained no hero to defend the kingdom. The events of Ocarina are suitably mythologized, befitting the game's legendary stature. Longtime fans will find this sequence especially tantalizing, for the consequences that recontextualize the earlier legend, and the connections teased with the current tale. Much like this here retrospective video series, Wind Waker is elevated by having experienced the previous entries. Hint hint, nudge nudge, Link is in the corner. No, not that Link. I really gotta fire this editor. The epic plot humbly begins on a sleepy island with a sleepy boy. The adorable Errol dutifully searches for her brother, eventually spotting him enjoying a nap on his birthday. Don't be fooled by the fashionable pajamas. This is none other than our boy Link. Grandma's calling him home, but he doesn't miss the chance to greet the various residents of Outset Island on the way. They offer fairly condescending tutorial messages, yet more importantly, paint a detailed picture of Link's daily life. This Link is a relatable, down-to-earth character, which stands in sharp contrast to the now almost deified Hero of Time. Like the game's intended audience, his biggest concerns are juggling chores and hobbies. He's got friends, family, and a contented life on the island. It's counterintuitive, but this Link's exaggerated proportions only help to humanize the hero. His facial features may be simple, but they allow for surprising levels of expression. Always a plus, but doubly so when dealing with a silent protagonist. Those colossal cat eyes are the secret ingredient that pulls the look together, but I adore the whole package. This redesign, fondly dubbed Toon Link, is a perfect fit for this game's tone, and my personal favorite incarnation of the hero. He starts to look the part upon donning the ceremonial coming-of-age attire that Grandma prepared. The gifts just keep coming, as Errol lends her most prized telescope for Link's special day. All these warm little interactions with Grandma and Errol are so sweet it just melts my heart. We can't bask in these tender moments as long as I'd like, however. Outset's characteristic tranquility is abruptly shattered by the arrival of a monstrous bird with a roguish pirate crew in pursuit. That ominous bird, the Helmarok King, takes a cannonball to the face and drops its captive, a young pirate girl, deep into the nearby forest. This calls for a rescue mission. Link hurriedly grabs some steel from the wizened Swordmaster Orca before mustering up all his courage to save her. Sword combat in this game represents a substantial evolution from the stiff N64 titles. The movement and strike combos have a much more satisfying fluidity to them. The camera too is more advanced, but not without some quirks. The intuitive Z targeting system is mercifully retained, but the C-stick now also allows for a limited free camera. The ability to get a better view of this beautiful world is appreciated, but truthfully I often found myself returning to a traditional reliance on the Z, or rather the L button, to quickly recenter my view, rather than muss around with the finicky C-stick. It's difficult to explain without experiencing firsthand, but the responsiveness of this camera just doesn't gel with my modern muscle memory. To make matters more difficult, there is no option for reversing the inverted controls. This is simply not how my brain works. I should stress that this is more a me problem than a flaw with the game, but if you're wondering why I'm always drunkenly fumbling with the camera, there's your reason. No sooner is the brash Tetra rescued than the fearsome bird makes its return, only this time kidnapping Errol instead, thanks to a classic pointy ear mix-up. This deeply personal attack on Link's loved ones marks the inciting incident in his heroic quest. After some convincing, a reluctant Tetra allows the naive boy to accompany her crew to Forsaken Fortress. Wind Waker has a real strength in masterfully balancing genuine emotion with interspersed silliness. These comedic beats land all the better for coming as a surprise. By offering light and fun moments of levity, without undermining the narrative stakes, Wind Waker somehow manages to have its cake and eat it too. Tetra's playful mockery of Link's sentimentality instantly made me fall in love with her. The irreverence is a great bit of organic characterization. This farewell is honestly a highlight of the entire game, and perfectly exemplifies the emotional intelligence of Wind Waker's writing. On board the pirate ship, the player is subjected to another round of thinly veiled tutorials, this time under the guise of swabby training. Some of this is unavoidable, obviously, but I wish it weren't so egregious. Such blatant tutorials get old quickly, and all the hand-holding puts a damper on the opening hours. Unfortunately, there is more to come, but I'll leave my complaining here. I'm sure you get the point. On the bright side, our time training with Nico does establish him as more of a character than the rest of the pirate crowd. We don't spend too much time with the pirates, so it's not a big deal that they largely fade into the background, but I appreciate that we have a more personal rapport with Nico. Gonzo, as Tetra's right-hand man, also leaves a stronger impression. I would have loved for him to be more fleshed out as well. A most heavily guarded Forsaken Fortress demands a covert infiltration operation. The pirates' onboard cannon and Link's newfound gift for pantomime are fit for the job. Seriously, or I guess not so seriously, this game's lighthearted tone is incredibly infectious. The Forsaken Fortress is a bit of an oddity. In some ways, it's the game's first dungeon, but in many other ways, it isn't. Despite the presence of a compass and a map, I'm going to push for mini-dungeon status myself. For better or for worse, this section feels very experimental for the Zelda series. Before reclaiming your sword, you must rely on makeshift sticks to take out the bokoblins stationed in each watchtower. This begins to hint at a fun new twist to combat in Wind Waker that will be expanded upon later: the ability to wield enemies' dropped weapons. For now though, having to fetch a new weapon at the onset of every fight is just an added annoyance. Our time in the Forsaken Fortress is pretty irritating in general, at least in my book. The stealth sections, of which there are several, repeatedly ended with me caught by the larger patrol moblins. I'll admit that's probably on me. Stealth has never been my forte. I'm a self-professed impatient person, and this manifests tenfold in video games. That being said, I'd be surprised if anyone finds this to be a fun segment. Even if you manage to breeze through on your first attempt, the experience still drags in some already slow-paced opening hours. After ascending the fortress and recovering your sword at long last, you are afforded exactly one bokoblin walloping, before finding yourself forcefully ejected from the premises. Rather than a triumphant return home with his sister in tow, Link finds himself stranded on an unfamiliar island with only a talking boat for company. You really shouldn't drink the seawater, buddy. Enter the King of Red Lions, our new travel companion, analogous to Navi or Tattle from the previous titles. He's always happy to offer guidance when asked, but mercifully tends to keep his mouth shut otherwise. This is definitely the right approach to take. Anything to avoid the incessant interruptions. But I'd be lying if I pretended there wasn't a trade-off. For me, the King of Red Lions is orders of magnitude less memorable than his counterparts, to the point where it sometimes feels like Wind Waker omits the companion trope entirely. Strangely enough, I often missed the constant presence of an adventuring buddy. I know, there's no pleasing me, right? But maybe a better balance could have been struck. The problem is that the King of Red Lions doesn't feel like an active participant in the adventure. As a boat, he's naturally left at the docks during terrestrial exploration, and can only communicate as a disembodied voice through the pirate's charm. Furthermore, even at sea, it's easy to forget he is a sentient being, rather than just a means of transportation. Eventually he takes on a more important role in the story, but for now he's just an exposition machine. Case in point, establishing that shadowy figure atop the Forsaken Fortress as none other than the one and the only Ganondorf. Before embarking on the obligatory MacGuffin hunt that this is predictably leading towards, Link must carry out some quick errands on Windfall Island, chiefly purchasing a sail for his new boat friend. Windfall hides it well, but actually quietly rivals Clocktown in its depth. A strikingly large portion of the game's quality side content is tucked away on this island. That's getting ahead of ourselves though. This is just a cursory introduction to Windfall. Still, I'm already liking the place. After all, they've correctly identified Tingle as the undesirable deviant that he is. Wind Waker's first act doesn't stray far from series tradition. Collect 3 sacred pearls, each tied to the power of the goddesses. Sea travel is introduced through essentially an on-rails journey to Dragon Roost Island. I'll save the deep dive into the Great Sea for later, but on the surface it's yet another feast for the senses. How are you liking these water puns, by the way? Pretty good, right? Dramatic framing, bold colors, swelling music, and little touches like Link's fluttering hat or the gulls riding on the visible gusts of wind, all combine to immerse you in the adventure. I can almost feel the salty spray on my face. The picturesque, painterly quality of the scene is very slightly marred by the boat's frequent clipping with the ocean, but that's some real next level nitpicking. Matthew Matosis, one of the inspirations behind this channel, drew my attention to this in his Wind Waker review, and now I'm passing that curse on to you. I do have a lot of respect for the seamless transitions between controlling Link on land and the boat out in the blue. There's no cutscene or loading screen to split the gameplay experience into 2 distinct halves. Link immediately takes control of the boat upon climbing aboard, with no break in the action whatsoever. On a similar note, the ability to jump out of your boat at any point to take a dip or climb aboard a neighboring ship is a huge deal, and I question if this novel navigation would work at all otherwise. These might seem like minor quality of life features, but I'd argue they're integral to selling a continuous game world. This map ran the risk of feeling like isolated islands, with only a loose hub as the connective tissue holding them all together, a la Super Mario 64. This effect isn't entirely eliminated. I still dislike the fragmented nature of the map compared to previous Zelda games, but the Great Sea is elevated beyond a level select. There's a heart piece waiting on nearby Pawprint Island if you feel like taking a detour, but ultimately the wind propels us to Roost Island for the next plot beat. That wind takes on new importance with the introduction of the titular Wind Waker, a magical baton that fills the same role as the ocarina in previous games. The biggest difference is the introduction of tempo. Players are forced to adhere to the correct timing. I personally miss the abhorrent cacophonies caused by slamming out each note as quickly as possible, but I can see why Nintendo might prefer the songs be heard as intended. There are 3 different time signatures that songs can follow, and I don't know about you, but I'm already finding the system overly complicated for what should be simple. This is really just a menu with extra steps. There's no need to get carried away. The primary use case for the Wind Waker, controlling the wind's direction with the Wind's Requiem song, is introduced early, and will remain a vital tool for navigation and puzzle solving throughout the entirety of this adventure. Up, left, right. Remember it well. Roost is home to the Rito, not to mention an absolute banger of a music track. These bird-like newcomers are a great addition to the Zelda canon. They slot in naturally with the other established tribes, and feel like they could have always been a part of this world. We find the Rito in a calamitous period, as is typical in these games. Valoo, their patron deity, has suddenly undergone a violent change. His uncharacteristic rage has prevented an important ceremony from taking place, in which adolescent Rito grow their wings. No one suffers from this disruption more than the shy young prince, Komali. This poor depressed boy rebuffs any attempts to inspire him, and only takes comfort in Din's Pearl, a memento from his late grandmother. Resisting the temptation to mug the kid, Link instead takes the high road and seeks means to calm Valoo down. It is my pleasure to introduce the lovely Medli, Komali's closest friend and Valoo's attendant in training. I have a serious soft spot for Medli. She is unspeakably adorable with that awkwardly oversized duckbill. Her bravery and sense of duty in setting out for Valoo on her own is inspirational, if a bit foolhardy. She's in way over her head, and let's not forget the girl did just suffer a serious concussion mere minutes prior. We better follow to make sure she doesn't get into too much trouble. A brief bomb tutorial later, and we officially enter the game's first proper dungeon, Roost Cavern. If you're new to this channel, here's something you should know. I consider the series' trademark dungeons to be the bread and butter of these games. Also, I suppose I owe you a belated welcome. Happy to have you here, and I hope you're enjoying. Anyway, long ago, a young Austin fell in love with the thrill of conquering these labyrinthian puzzle boxes, and they've been at the heart of my Zelda obsession ever since. To me, it's absolutely crucial that each game continues to nail this aspect. You might not think it fair, but these games seriously live or die by their dungeons. At the end of the day, Roost Cavern is only a so-so starting point. We'll give Wind Waker the benefit of the doubt for now, but it's my hope that the dungeon difficulty ramps up dramatically from here. I don't know why I'm pretending I don't know how the rest of the game unfolds. Unless this is your very first Zelda game, bomb puzzles and lighting torches are extremely stale motifs. Despite multiple levels of escalating complexity, there's never anything puzzling about these puzzles. Even when compared to other intro dungeons, Roost is basic, but it is partially redeemed through strong theming. Here I go again, falling into the trap of repeatedly praising the visuals to soften game design criticism. But I do really enjoy the variety of environments within the dungeon. The volcanic rooms look fantastic in Wind Waker's art style, and that hazy heat distortion offers a unique atmosphere. Dimly lit caverns and that patented Wind Waker blue found in the outdoor segments contrast fantastically with the reds and yellows that dominate the palette. Exterior exploration is very limited, consistent of a straight path to Medley's prison cell, and then an obvious grappling hook path to follow, but it does wonders in making the progression path through the dungeon feel more dynamic than it truly is. Speaking of the grappling hook, I really don't like it. Sure, it's a new item which does count for something, but it opens scant new design space compared to the old reliable hookshot. 9 times out of 10, these glaring grapple points are just a means to cross a simple gap, but very occasionally you'll be asked to hang in place to adjust your height or angle prior to completing the swing. This is extremely cumbersome in motion. Now I understand why Nico was so insistent on training players how to swing on his ropes. How much you want to bet that Nico's tutorial was added as a band-aid fix to widespread grapple hook frustrations during playtesting. As a random aside, riding these stone platforms up through the volcanic chute awoke some deep nostalgic memory of some animated movie from my childhood, but I can't put my finger on what it was. Anyone know what I'm referring to? Because I'm going crazy trying to recall this. Regardless, these platforms are one of the highlights of the dungeon for me. They're a cool transport between the different levels of the central room, made even cooler because the player themselves formed them from conveniently placed water pots. It's a really limited version of something like Majora's Mask's ice arrows, but a more freeform implementation might be asking too much from a starter dungeon. I don't think it's too much to ask for a decent boss, however, and yet another implementation of Goma is not it. Recurring bosses aren't inherently bad if given meaningful revision, but I shouldn't have to explain why I'd prefer fresh designs wherever possible. I'm not whining about Goma's familiarity, although it certainly doesn't help matters, but I am specifically criticizing the unbelievable simplicity to the fight. Zelda boss encounters are overly formulaic across the board in their reliance on the dungeon item, but Goma gives whole new meaning to the word uninspired. The intimidating scale of the monster and the fire elements added to the fight are desperate attempts to sell this as an epic clash, but beneath all the smoke and mirrors, Ocarina's Goma was a far more involved fight. Valu's tail hanging from the chamber ceiling is just begging to be targeted with the grapple hook. Repeat this 3 times to break Goma's armor. Grapple Goma's eye, because why not, and that's a wrap. Unless you intentionally drag out the fight, you don't even get a chance to see Goma's attacks, or utilize the upper levels of the arena. As one silver lining, there is something to be said about a direct line of cause and effect between defeating the boss and helping the locals. This isn't some vague blight upon the Deku Tree. The connection between Valu's frenzy and the nasty bug nibbling on his tail is crystal clear. Our heroism feels earned through tangible results. Komali beginning to heal and a degree of normalcy return to Dragon Roost Island. With one Din's Pearl in hand, we take to see where else our services are needed. The King of Red Lions recommends we head south to the Forest Haven, where the next sacred pearl is hidden. Who do we find within this lush sanctuary but the great Deku Tree himself? I understand the need to tread lightly here. After all, I literally just finished complaining about Goma. Please don't mistake the return of this familiar tree for lazy recycling. It is a considered choice that adds fantastic depth to Wind Waker's world. The ancient forest guardian is initially confused by Link's heroic garb, modeled after the hero of time, and greets him as an old friend in the ancient tongue. I take this as implicit confirmation. This is the very same Deku Tree sprout that gained the acquaintance of a different Link after the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time. Never would have guessed he'd grown to such a Chad though. I mean, look at that jawline. Centuries have passed, but little connections like this reassure fans that remnants of Hyrule live on. Instead of the Kokiri, the Great Deku Tree now watches over a tribe of plant-like beings known as Koroks. The Kokiri and Koroks are linked beyond the similarity of their names. These fellas are explicitly described as the descendants of Ocarina's forest children. The exact nature of this transformation is best left to the player's imagination, but their feather-light bodies allow the Koroks to ride the winds and further their dream of planting forests throughout the lands. Of course, things aren't quite so fine and dandy with the Koroks, who have been driven from their homes by the encroaching evil. One of their own, Makar, fell into this now forbidden woods, and requires yet another classic Link rescue mission. By calling upon some Majora's Mask muscle memory, Link can ascend the Great Deku Tree by launching out of a series of spring-loaded Baba Buds. It is here that we are given the fantastic Deku Leaf. Like the grapple hook, this is a brand new item. Unlike the grapple hook, it is an incredible addition that feels absolutely indispensable in its applicability. And it's fun to use too. Quite simply, one of the all-time greatest Zelda items. As we glide on the wind towards the foreboding second dungeon, the appeal speaks for itself. To contrast with Lil Deku Link in Majora's Mask, Wind Waker Link isn't limited to dev-determined, pre-arranged gliding sequences. This new universally available ability empowers the player with a very high degree of agency in how they navigate the game world and solve spatial puzzles. I love how it intuitively reacts to the wind's direction, just as the sail does. The dev team deserves kudos for how cohesively all of these systems work together. Before I get carried away, I will offer one of my patented nitpicks to the team. The Deku Leaf and the sail absolutely could and should have been combined into a single item to reduce the tedium of cycling equipment. Multiple items, like the grapple hook, are given additional utility while riding the boat. Merging the leaf and sail is such low-hanging fruit that it frustrates me this was missed. For all the strengths of the Deku Leaf, the Forbidden Woods represents yet another unremarkable dungeon. Yes, this is still early game, but I really am expecting a far greater degree of complexity in my 3D Zelda dungeons. To its credit, and deja vu aside, the atmosphere here is strong. The Forbidden Woods is filled with little instances of environmental storytelling, seemingly supporting my headcanon that this is an even more twisted evolution of Ocarina's Lost Woods. At the very least, we know it to be the Korok's homeland, and I appreciated getting a glimpse into their past. That's all great, but the dungeon fails to offer much at all in terms of compelling gameplay. Small-scale puzzles in each room gradually build upon each other. Ordinarily, this cycle of teaching and testing would be praiseworthy. However, the puzzles start far too basic, and never actually reach any degree of difficulty, even at their climax. Case in point, the game teaches you that these vine doors can only be opened by striking them from a distance, so you toss a nut at one. Then you use the Deku Leaf to ferry the nut across a gap. Next, you have to fan a nut outside a spike trap before using it, etc., etc. Nowhere in this sequence did I ever find the puzzles remotely challenging or interesting. These aren't brain teasers, they're little more than chores to keep the player busy. Honestly, skipping all the training and build-up and just jumping to the final iteration of this puzzle motif would have been a completely reasonable ask of the player. Making my way through the Forbidden Woods just felt like I was going through the motions. Not once did I ever need to stop and think. Overall progression is extremely linear. The layout feels specifically designed to always point you in the right direction. Any potential frustration at getting lost is smoothed out, at the expense of the sense of triumph at overcoming a challenge. Once I obtained the dungeon item, a spruced up boomerang, I could literally feel the dungeon railroading me towards the spot where it must be used, to open up the lower levels. Within the very first hour of Ocarina of Time, that game already demonstrated more respect for the player's intelligence, with significantly subtler signposting in a similar scenario. The boomerang itself is an innocent bystander in all this, now differentiated from the other projectiles through a clever multi-targeting system. Drawing out intricate twisty paths for the boomerang, and then sitting back to watch it whip through a crowd of enemies, never grew old. This new ability is only used for the most basic puzzles here, but its unique capabilities will remain relevant throughout our entire quest. Honestly, the boomerang plays second fiddle to the Deku Leaf, even within its own dungeon, which is totally justified given how awesome the thing is. The fight against Kale Demos offers the boomerang some spotlight, but this is yet another case of style over substance. I apologize for being so repetitive, but once again I have to push back against these copy-paste boss designs. Evidently, it wasn't enough for Kale Demos to draw obvious visual inspiration from Ocarina's Baronade. It's even defeated in the exact same manner. As noted earlier, many of the connections Wind Waker shares with Ocarina ultimately strengthen the game, but many more reek of laziness. As a cheap throwback at best, Baronade 2.0 belongs to the latter camp. And not for nothing, but Baronade, really? Lamest boss in Ocarina if you ask me. As always, the boss does look fantastic, but, and this is becoming a somewhat worrying trend with Wind Waker, beneath that spectacle is naught but a hollow core. With the lead musician Makar safely returned, the Koroks can carry out their annual ceremony,
dispersing to all corners of the seas to plant new forests. Be sure to keep an eye out for them as our journey continues.
The Great Sea opens up completely at this point. With the Wind Waker to set course and a ranged weapon to defend, players are free to sail in any direction their heart desires. Unfortunately, an adventurous spirit this early on isn't very well rewarded. Most side content remains locked behind abilities that we just don't have yet. In theory, this kind of gating could provide that classic Metroidvania satisfaction, where deliberate backtracking is handsomely rewarded. In practice, however, when nearly everything is blocked off, it's better to just stick to the critical path for now. Don't worry, I'll have much more to say about the Great Sea's optional content later on in the video, when it's more appropriate. That said, this absolutely is the time to start filling out your sea chart. The waters can be neatly split into a 7x7 grid, akin to the map found in the original Legend of Zelda. Unlike that NES classic, a hand-drawn map isn't necessary to keep the different islands straight. Instead, weird little wandering fishmen will fill in little sections of the map in exchange for tasty treats. This gradual reveal of the map is a great marriage between old-school tradition and modern convenience. Don't throw out your pen and paper just yet, however. Each fishman also shares hints and tidbits about his local island. Unless you're gifted with a superhuman memory, you'll want to jot these down for later. Our buoyant guide now points us northwest, toward Greatfish Isle, home of the water spirit Jaboon, and the third sacred pearl. Just as Wind Waker's plot structure has grown predictable, Greatfish Isle throws us a curveball. This time we were too late. The island has already been destroyed by the army of evil. Word is that the Great Fish himself escaped the attack, which raises the question of how exactly Valoo knows of Jaboon's whereabouts. I like to imagine Jaboon, Valoo, and the GDT catching up in a divine private group chat. Hey Jaboon, you good? Yeah, just chillin' in my panic cave. Jaboon is locked up tight on Outset Island, so a quick detour to Windfall's bomb shop is our next order of business. Wind Waker does feature a day-night system and primitive dynamic weather, but a heavy storm perpetuates throughout this episode. The oppressive weather presents a rare sense of dread, which is a stark contrast to the typical bright, cheery vibe while sailing the Great Sea, and an effective means of raising the perceived stakes. Our old pirate pals, having caught wind of potential treasure, manage to beat us to the punch. We spy them raiding the bomb shop owner. The crew has been absent for quite some time, so it's nice to get reacquainted and enjoy glimpses of their wannabe macho energy and camaraderie. Tetra continues to be a highlight of the game's cast. That mischievous wink is such a charming peek into her softer side, hidden under the tough exterior. Even without the exchange of a single word, you can feel the trust and, dare I say, friendship growing between them. By doing Link this favor, allowing him to make off with their explosive plunder, she offers him a chance to prevent his hometown from befalling a similar fate as Greatfish Isle. With only naive Nico on guard duty, still obsessed with rope courses, bless his soul, we grab the goods and rush back to Outset. Just like the grapple hook, the bombs are very cleanly incorporated into ship controls, allowing Link to operate the King of Red Lion's onboard cannon, to fight sea monsters, and more pressingly, introduce ourselves to Jaboon. Given the Great Deku Tree's overt connections to Ocarina of Time, it's not a stretch to say Jaboon is likely a descendant of Ocarina's Jabu Jabu, which would make Valoo related to Volvagia, right? And Dragon Roost Island the remnants of Death Mountain. The presence of bomb flowers and the special attention paid to Din offer further credence to this theory. Now you may think I'm having my cake and eating it too here, simultaneously praising some connections with Ocarina while criticizing others. I really should attempt to differentiate these attitudes, because this talking point is going to come up again and again. I do think the game goes too far with bosses and other Control-C, Control-V elements. I won't hesitate to call out such lazy attempts at nostalgia bait. However, direct or insinuated relationships between characters and locations from Ocarina and Wind Waker invite fans to engage with the game world on a deeper level. I've personally spent an appreciable amount of time fleshing out theories on fan forums, and that's a product of the numerous tantalizing breadcrumbs the game leaves. As for Jaboon himself, this incarnation of the Whale Titan sports an anglerfish inspiration, a fresh look that sets him apart from the other Zelda great fishes. He doesn't keep up with the changing times too well, and can only communicate with the King of Red Lions in ancient Hylian. This is an unconventional but shrewd move that reinforces the idea that Link is a small fish in a big ocean, one shaped by ancient, unknowable forces. We only hear one side of the conversation here, but in New Game Plus, Jaboon's lines are translated. Once you understand what is truly being discussed here, this scene takes on a whole new light, with major spoilers hidden in plain sight. While on the subject, shout out to the series for its use of Hylian as a functional written language for passionate players to decode. Shout out also to those dedicated fans for putting the legwork in to glean extra world-building detail, and for disseminating down to less motivated individuals, such as your humble narrator. Fret not, the structural switch-up surrounding the third Goddess Pearl doesn't preclude the third dungeon you'd expect to accompany it. These sacred relics pave the path toward one final test, the Tower of the Gods, where Link must prove himself worthy of the hero's legacy. Here's a fun fact for you. Dragon Roost, Forest Haven, and Greatfish Isle form the points of a big triangle on the sea chart, and then the 3 Goddess Pearl pedestals create a smaller triangle within the greater one. The Tower of the Gods emerges from the sea right in the center of this Triforce. This has been Cartography 101 with Austin Ashworth. The tower immediately sets itself apart through its flooded entryway. Oddly enough, this is the closest that Wind Waker ever comes to a water-themed dungeon. As with the outdoor bits of Dragon Roost Cavern, I love it when dungeons break the mold, and navigating portions of the dungeon by boat is certainly a unique feature to this dungeon alone. Forsaken Fortress still doesn't count as a traditional dungeon though. As a cornerstone of classic Zelda, I do have some limits to how experimental I want these to get. This dungeon has an intriguing ancient temple motif. Say what you will about these first 3 dungeons, but they do all have unique theming, which I certainly appreciate. The Tower of the Gods also sets itself apart through the segmented nature of its progression. There are 2 different points in the dungeon where progress in a large inner room relies upon completing a series of isolated single-room puzzles, branching off from the central principal gate. Of course, when you break down all but the most intricate 3D Zelda dungeons, they all tend to follow this basic hub-and-spoke pattern. Tower of the Gods is just more upfront about it. There's minimal effort put into masking the structure through clever pathing. Surprisingly, I actually like this about the dungeon, at least when judged in isolation. In a game with more complex layouts, a toned-down one focused on disjointed challenge rooms could stand out in a really strong way. This segmented structure also suits the thematic purpose of the tower well. This is a divine testing ground, not some natural formation. Most of the challenges within consist of finding roundabout methods to move statues from point A to point B. The repetition does grate on me a bit, but the solutions are generally varied enough. The command melody, a new song for the Wind Waker, is your main tool for manipulating the statues, and opens up many new puzzle opportunities. Those with Water Temple PTSD might find playing the melody over and over to approach the tedium of swapping the iron boots on and off, but at least the more straightforward puzzles here put a hard cap on the number of interruptions. The bow is solid as always, not particularly novel, but it does mark a satisfying turning point in my opinion. The inventory has now grown large enough that I occasionally forget about a tool in my arsenal. With more items come more ways to interact with your surroundings, and therefore more diverse means of overcoming puzzles. Anecdotally, I had a great experience in this random room, where a statue is blocked by an electric barrier. The command melody can't be used at this distance, and a button must be held down to deactivate the gate, thus preventing Link from passing through on his own. Because dungeon puzzles so often revolve around their own signature dungeon item, my mind was so fixated on how I could possibly use the bow or command melody that it took me quite a bit to even consider gliding over the barrier with the Deku Leaf. I think this was the first time a puzzle actually had me momentarily stumped in this game, and for that I give the Tower of Gods special credit. The mini-boss here is an introduction to the Dark Nut. These guys are a fearsome Zelda staple, and Wind Waker's variant is particularly great. Taking down a Dark Nut is a 2-phase affair. First they lumber towards you with a full set of impenetrable armor, then take on a more aggressive agile stance once unencumbered. Armor is removed by a well-timed parry. I'm glad the game essentially requires the special technique here. In an adventure almost devoid of combat challenges, the parry would otherwise be forgotten as a bit of unnecessary fluff. These encounters are also an exemplary showcase for the new dropped weapon system.
The ability to disarm a giant and then turn his colossal sword against its owner makes for a very dynamic, satisfying encounter that remains compelling each time. I can't say the same about the main boss. This final trial before the gods, a fight against a mechanical being dubbed Godan, takes the familiar disembodied form of Ocarina's Bongo Bongo. To be fair, the fight does incorporate bombs into the mix, and sports a wider variety of attacks. On the other hand, Bongo Bongo is way cooler with his nightmarish design and arena, not to mention the invisibility calling card. To be crystal clear, this recycling of Ocarina's bosses is the wrong kind of fan service. All 3 of the bosses we've fought so far are recycled designs from Ocarina, and only Goma calls for a substantially different approach to the fight. There is a difference between paying homage and just taking the lazy way out. A mechanical guardian created by the goddesses themselves is inherently an awesome setup for a boss. I was so ready for a grand slam to cap off a comparatively strong dungeon. The Tower of the Gods comes close to greatness, and a memorable climax might have pushed it over the edge. Oh well. I'm obligated to bring up Dark Souls in every video of mine, so I won't pass up the chance to compare the bell atop the tower to the Bell of Awakening in Undead Parish. In both cases, the ringing of the bell marks a major turning point in each respective game. Having earned the goddess's approval, a magical portal opens to whisk us to the depths of Sunken Hyrule, shielded by a magical barrier and suspended in time. Remember that intro cutscene? The Great Sea is the consequence of a divine deluge, the last resort of the goddesses to prevent Ganon from blanketing the land in darkness. Completely drained of color and populated by the frozen remains of the invading army, this is truly an eerie scene. Within a secret chamber, the castle holds the key to defeating Ganondorf, the very same Blade of Evil's bane from legend. The shot of Link drawing the Master Sword may not live up to the indescribable epicness of Ocarina of Time's sequence, but this chamber is one of my all-time favorite locations in the series. The sword served as the seal holding Ganon's army in stasis, so with it removed, we've got quite the fight waiting for us in the castle's main hall, but it's peaceful in here. I adore the stained glass mural depictions of Ocarina of Time's sages, Saria, Darunia, Rudo, Rauru, Impa, and Naburu. The gang's all here. Immortalizing those key figures that helped the hero of time defeat Ganon is a really tasteful way for Wind Waker to honor the past. Putting yourself in Link's shoes, consider how overwhelming and emotional all of this must be to him. The aforementioned large-scale castle brawl is simply a blast. The encounter is thrillingly chaotic, and players are encouraged to get creative in how they approach it. With so many enemies to face at once, it's a great opportunity to bait them into friendly fire, or just wield the oversized weapons yourself. It's finally time to take the fight back to the Forsaken Fortress. Errol needs rescuing, and Ganon needs a whooping. This time, Link makes a far more dignified entrance, befitting a proper hero, but comes face to face with a specter stationed to guard the fortress from do-gooders like us. I'll do us both a favor by skipping over the rehashed boss diatribe. It seems Nintendo forgot how integral the painting phase of Ocarina's boss was. Fighting Phantom Ganon out in the open with nothing but a played out Dead Man's Volley is a waste of a rad visual redesign. The Skull Hammer is a combat-focused item first and foremost, but it does have some practical use in navigating the Forsaken Fortress. It works just as the hammer always has in Zelda games, nothing much has changed. But the sheer joy of turning these annoying mini-blins into cartoon pancakes is more than enough to earn my approval. If I were to grant full dungeon status to the Forsaken Fortress, I'd probably praise the creativity behind splitting the dungeon into two halves that are explored many hours apart. I might even compliment this fresh approach for the feeling of growth instilled in the player as they tear through what previously was an overwhelming dungeon, in quotes. Where before Link was prey just fighting for survival, now he is the predator, carving a path through the monsters to save his sister at long last. But all of that is a moot point, because you guessed it, I still stubbornly refuse to grant Forsaken Fortress full dungeon status. What can I say? I'm a stickler for semantics. The touching sibling reunion is cut short by Tetra's level-headed admonishment. The Helmarok King, that fearsome bird who incited this whole mess, needs to be put down for Errol and the other captured girls to truly be safe from harm. As the pirates shepherd the little ones to safety, Link steels himself for some well-earned payback. This boss fight, notably the first without any counterpart in Ocarina, is a two-phase affair with a strong flair for spectacle. First up is a race to the top of the chamber. There's very little actual danger, but nevertheless the rising water levels and collapsing scaffolding fashion a frantic feel not unlike the escape sequences in a Metroid game. The second phase, atop a spire on the fortress, is once again more style than substance, but I can dig it nevertheless. Link is confined to a cramped walled-off area, but the perceived openness of the arena allows the Helmarok King to fluidly fly in and out of range, all the while cutting a striking silhouette against the night sky. I have my usual gripes with this, of course, namely far too much downtime waiting for the opportunity to inflict damage, but the strength of the vibes outweigh any negative side effects of this approach. Mechanically, the fight is pretty simple, defensive play until an opening presents itself, but after all this build-up, those brutal hammer slams feel dang good. Nameless King this is not, but for Zelda, this is a pretty solid boss fight. Victory is short-lived, however. Even having dispatched his underling, Ganondorf still proves far too powerful for a fledgling hero and a dulled ancient blade. Link and Tetra find themselves in desperate danger. Help does arrive, just in the nick of time, but not before Ganondorf is able to put the pieces together and deduce Tetra's true identity. It's a glaring case of Deus Ex Machina, but I appreciate incorporating Valoo and Prince Kamali into this scene. It's nice to see them in a different light, with the effects of Link's intervention at Dragon Roost coming full circle. The episodic structure of these games typically sees side characters disappear into the background once they've filled their role in the story. Any breaks from that rigid format are refreshing. Two major reveals follow in Hyrule Castle. 1. The King of Red Lions is actually an incarnation of ancient Hyrule's last king, Daphne's Nohansen Hyrule. What a mouthful. This twist feels completely unearned to me. The writers don't even attempt to explain how a king, buried under the sea hundreds of years ago, is able to moonlight as a sentient boat on the surface in the modern era. I'm especially confused by the conversation that takes place over Tetra's pirate charm, itself a fragment from the ancient Gossip Stones. Neat touch. Link and Tetra are literally sitting inside the King of Red Lions, while also talking to King Hyrule, and we're expected to follow that these kings are one and the same? It's messy to a fault, but I'm able to suspend my disbelief to enjoy the story being told. On the other hand, I'm not going to back down on the Tetra is Zelda reveal. I really hate how this twist is handled, and I consider it character assassination of the highest order. Upon hearing of her ancestry, Tetra goes into some sort of Triforce-induced trance, and is compelled to transform into a more traditionally recognizable princess. It goes without saying that this Zelda design is adorable. I have no beef there, but she is so radically different from the Tetra we knew and loved. Both in terms of physical appearance and personality, this is a completely different, utterly unrecognizable character. All the feistiness and spunk instantly evaporates, leaving a total personality void. And that's not even to mention the literal whitewashing. Princess Zelda is no stranger to sweeping transformations, but the Sheik Guise was her own creation, a voluntary makeover. With all her agency conversely stripped away, I just pity what has become of the once fearless pirate leader. Sheik existed to give Zelda an active role in Ocarina of Time's story, whereas Tetra's transformation has the exact opposite effect, pushing her into a passive role, hidden away like just another damsel in distress. Tetra could have just as easily remained Tetra after receiving this news, and a strong story would be all the stronger for it. I imagine forcing the free-spirited, fiercely independent Tetra to grapple with the burden of her royal lineage would only deepen her character. Instead, the game's very best character just spontaneously disappears, with a replacement so devoid of personality it makes me legitimately angry. I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to anyone, but Zelda games tend to follow familiar formulas. One major pattern, practically a tradition at this point, is a set of 3 dungeons before some major story shift going into the second half of the game. In Ocarina of Time, a game that Wind Waker clearly aims to imitate, a time jump separates a trio of child dungeons from the 5 adult dungeons. Looking even further back, A Link to the Past pulls the same stunt, 3 dungeons followed by an introduction to the Dark World, with a whopping 7 further dungeons. I don't mean to imply that Zelda games must adhere to this structure, but it is a clear pattern that Wind Waker has followed thus far. Our initial goal was to collect the 3 Sacred Pearls. Now, focus has shifted to restoring the Master Sword's power, which involves awakening the power of the sages. And yet, nothing really changes. Unlike Ocarina and Link to the Past, the world sees no fresh transformation to accompany the second set of dungeons. This is a major disappointment to me. Recall how memorable those timid first steps into Hyrule's future or its dark reflection were when playing the previous games. Wind Waker seems poised to match that wonder when it teases an entire new map beneath the sea in Sunken Hyrule. But it's just that, a tease. Instead of merely returning to familiar waters, how incredible would it be if the second half of the game saw Link conquering a new set of dungeons, while exploring this forgotten world, once lost to history? I can't help but feel that this was originally intended to be a fully realized second act, and I pine for that idealized version of Wind Waker. It's here that we must confront the game's rushed development. Wind Waker was in players' hands just 2.5 years after the previous mainline Zelda game. That title, Majora's Mask, was also developed in no time at all, but it at least could take advantage of Ocarina of Time's engine and assets, a luxury Wind Waker was not afforded. I certainly don't want to downplay how much the team was able to accomplish in that rushed timeline. It's truly incredible, but it would be dishonest to not also acknowledge that the cracks are very apparent. Our new quest to reawaken the Master Sword's power does not involve conquering 7 new dungeons as in Link to the Past, nor 5 new dungeons as in Ocarina of Time. Instead, there are a measly 2 sages to visit, with an accompanying 2 dungeons remaining. And all of this takes place on the same map, with no sense of a world expanding or changing. Now, I will try to remain fair, and judge the game for what it is rather than what I wish it to be. But can we all admit that this is a colossal case of missed potential? All late-game content has been locked behind classic item gates up until this point. The promise of an arrow upgrade has been dangled for some time, but it's only after the recent plot beats in Sunken Hyrule that Link can finally claim it. By riding a cyclone to the hidden fairy fountain on Mother and Child Isle, Link is given the fire and ice arrows. These in turn are required to disembark on Ice Ring Isle and Fire Mountain, naturally by using the opposite element arrow to temper the extreme temperatures. After a brief trial on each, Link's arsenal is expanded still further, with the iron boots and the power bracelet. New items are always exciting, but this rapid-fire delivery with minimal fanfare does lessen their impact. I hesitate to say that these would have been featured in the hypothetical cut dungeons, because they're all straightforward items. They're well suited for progression checks, but probably not deep enough for a whole dungeon's worth of puzzle focus. Still, I do wonder what those missing dungeons might have been like. With all the necessary items gathered and 2 quest markers on our map, players are seemingly offered a choice on which to tackle first. If you picked Gale Island, home of the Wind Temple, joke's on you. The Earth Temple on Headstone Island must be completed beforehand. Why, you ask? Who knows? Such a restriction is completely arbitrary, with no story or mechanical logic behind it whatsoever. The choice between Earth and Wind here would have only offered a teensy bit of non-linearity in the main quest. Nothing to write home about, but it was such an easy win. I'm baffled that the devs went out of their way to prevent it. Alright, moving on. In typical Zelda fashion, the power bracelets allow Link to lift large objects, like the titular headstone on Headstone Island.
The Earth God's lyric awakes a deceased Zora sage named Laruto. Pretty peculiar that this is the sole Zora appearance in such an aquatic game, but the blast from the past is most welcome. We're tasked with recruiting Laruto's descendant to take up the mantle, someone who carries the same harp she does. More time with my beloved Medli? Yes, please. Her interactions with Link are so precious. You can't tell me that these two don't belong together. While on the topic of shipping, I love that Medli actually sails with you to the Earth Temple. I would have expected her to meet us at the dungeon entrance, or even a simple fade to black. This attention to detail is a great touch. The Earth Temple shakes things up a bit from prior dungeons. Here, and later with the Wind Temple, you are accompanied by a partner throughout. This opens up some slight new headaches with all the babysitting required, but is definitely a net positive. At times, Medli must be carried, fitting for a Zora descendant, but the command melody also allows the player to directly take control of her. The process of swapping characters is unnecessarily tedious, but it's so novel to control someone other than Link. The introduction of this mechanic also appears to have motivated the designers into upping the ante in regards to puzzle difficulty. I'm not going to let myself get carried away, even the most intricate puzzles remain heavily telegraphed, but this is a much more appropriate difficulty for single-room puzzles. Take this impressive-looking arrangement using the Mirror Shield, this dungeon's core item. Link and Medli must cooperate to set up an elaborate sequence of mirrors, which can transmit sunlight to the special light-activated sun switch. Some degree of planning is called for, but the game also isn't shy about marking where each mirror must be placed for the whole chain to work. Stuff like this makes you feel clever for accomplishing something seemingly difficult, even if much of the heavy lifting was already done for you. Visually, the crypt aesthetic of the Earth Temple runs a bit drab, but a few standout rooms buck this trend. For example, check out this hazy maze that asks our hero to dodge and weave without the use of his sword, a unique challenge in a memorable setting. The creepy atmosphere comes across best through the dungeon's top-notch enemy theming. Pose, Redeads, and Stalfos, oh my! These spooky new enemies make great additions to the roster, because each requires a unique strategy. This is true of many of Wind Waker's foes, but it's especially noticeable here. You must approach a Redead entirely differently from a Stalfos. When the game throws them all together in a monster closet, an exhilarating face-off is sure to follow. And, get this, the boss is actually a unique concept. Jalhala doesn't present any real danger, but he is a super fun and creative boss, the best so far. The standard Poe fights earlier in the dungeon have trained the player to stun ghosts with light. Then, with the help of the power bracelet, we are treated to the slapstick sight of Link rolling the big fella like a bowling ball before he explodes like a piñata. The resulting shower of mini-Poes are a blast to dispatch with the Hurricane Spin technique. A strong finale to the best dungeon in the game, and I swear that's not just my Medli bias showing. She nobly chooses to stay behind to continue powering the Master Sword through her prayers, which always leaves me saddened. I hate picturing the poor thing all alone in this lonely temple with nothing but the dead for company. The sequence of events leading up to the Wind Temple are nearly identical to those of the Earth Temple, only this time with Fado, a former Kokiri sage, and his descendant Makar. You can awaken Fado as soon as you get the Iron Boots, but it's impossible to follow through with his request to find a successor until you've fully dealt with Laruto and Medli. The musical notes by the waterfall outside the Forest Haven, a clue to Makar's whereabouts, only appear when the time is right. Even if you knew about Makar's secret hideout beforehand, he'll still be absent until the Earth Temple is completed. This kind of artificial roadblocking is so sloppy. I expect better of Nintendo. The Wind Temple itself is something of a sibling to its predecessor, with the continued reliance on the dual character mechanic. Even beyond the diminishing returns that such repetition inevitably breeds, Makar's flight is very awkward to control, and he's just nowhere near as charming as Medli. However, the mechanic is put to fantastic use in the towering multi-level central chamber. The companion character can only be commanded while they're within the same room as Link, so larger rooms are a natural escalation method. It's really fun to ride the wind all the way up and then skydive right back down. This room is also a great fit for the hookshot, with all the alcoves scattered along the way. As far as I'm concerned, no 3D Zelda game is complete without the hookshot. It's too bad it's introduced so late in this adventure. The iron boots, thankfully streamlined from their ocarina implementation, also get some creative mileage here with all the wind threatening to blow Link away. Wind Waker has strong cohesion with all of its equipment, exemplified by the boots' modifying effects on the hookshot. Rather than pulling himself to heavy objects, when the boots are equipped, Link pulls them to him instead. Understandably, the iron boots have lost their more traditional utility in water. Yes, I tried. When you think about it, it is strange that Wind Waker offers no means of diving underwater, unlike both of its predecessors. Despite a bland, nondescript visual design, the Wind Temple is one of the better dungeons in Wind Waker, simply because it is the final one, and therefore the most difficult, but it still only meets my baseline expectation for 3D Zelda dungeon design. If more dungeons were indeed planned, I'd love to see where they go from here. This level of complexity just doesn't feel like the pinnacle of what the game could offer. As it stands, the dungeons end right when their design is starting to hit its stride. The boss, Mulgara, feels ripped straight out of Dune, which is obviously a compliment. That being said, I actually think the arena is more interesting. With all the shifting terrain, you've really got to keep your wits about you, or risk sinking into the sand traps. I'm sure that getting the physics to function properly wasn't trivial, and as far as I can tell, they're only utilized in this one room. As with most Wind Waker bosses, Mulgara suffers from an over-reliance on his associated dungeon item. There is no experimentation or strategizing phase to the fight. The hookshot is the all-purpose solution to hitting Mulgara's weak point and clearing his nuisance offspring. It's trivial to figure out the intended approach, and then equally trivial to execute it. I don't even expect tough bosses from Zelda, but I do want the fight to last long enough to savor the moment. I shouldn't have to intentionally stall just to get a good look at the boss's attack pattern, the boss of the final dungeon lest we forget. With the Master Sword fully powered up, I bet you're rearing for a rematch with Ganondorf. Oh, you sweet summer child. Wind Waker has one last task for Link, and it's a doozy. In the ages since the Hero of Time, the Triforce of Courage was splintered into 8 shards scattered all over the Great Sea. Now it's our job to collect them all. This is, without a doubt, the most controversial section of the Wind Waker. Ask around and most players will tell you it's a tedious slog with no respect for the player's time. I know I've been somewhat critical of the game thus far, so this might come as a shock, but I'm actually much more forgiving of the Triforce hunt. In fact, I'd go so far as to say I'm glad it's included. Let's not kid ourselves, this quest absolutely is transparent padding, blatant filler to stretch the runtime in the wake of cut content. But despite the less than noble origins, it does succeed in expanding the scope of the adventure. If you've stuck to the golden path in Wind Waker, ignoring all side content to focus on the main quest, you may have only visited 15 of the 49 total islands. It's entirely possible that 70% of the Great Sea remains unexplored. Nintendo had already built all these optional areas of the Great Sea. Can you really blame them for repurposing the better bits into main quest content? There are 8 Triforce charts hidden throughout the map, each requiring something different from the player, but collectively they all push the player to better engage with the game world. You are provided a helpful tracker, but otherwise are set free to explore autonomously. The ever-present guiding hand has finally lifted. In many ways, this segment feels closer to the openness of the original Legend of Zelda than anything that's come since. Plus, even the haters must admit that a treasure hunt is perfectly on brand for this seafaring venture. In lieu of a complete rundown of every individual Triforce Shard, you're welcome, I'll just highlight a few favorites. Along their travels, some players may have caught glimpses of a mysterious apparition out at sea, one that disappears just as suddenly as it appears. This is the Ghost Ship, home to one of the 8 Triforce charts, but how does one climb aboard? A tricky warp pot puzzle on Diamond Step Island holds the secret to tracking it down. The ship's position correlates to the current lunar phase. Come on, that's pretty dang cool, right? It certainly deserves more than a dinky heart piece reward, so I'm glad it was promoted to main quest material. For something completely different, players earn another Triforce chart by conquering 30 floors of the Savage Labyrinth, a lengthy combat gauntlet filled with all the toughest enemies. often in unique combinations. Still another Triforce chart involves Link purchasing a private oasis island that he can decorate to his liking. In between tanning sessions and sliding down the waterfall, you might stumble upon a secret subterranean maze with a special prize hidden deep within. Not all the charts host such unique detours, but there is strong variety here, and I don't quite understand why players are so critical of this chapter. It broadens the adventure and lets players loose to follow their own natural curiosity. The one specific complaint that I can sympathize with is the exorbitant rupee cost to deciphering these Triforce charts. You see, obtaining a Triforce chart is only the first step. You also need to cough up 398 rupees to learn the Sunken Triforce Shards location, and then actually go salvage it. Such a steep cost, 3,184 rupees in total, is a bit unreasonable for those who are just looking to play the game without worrying about completionism. As someone who enjoys 100% in the games that I love, I'm glad to have something to do with all the rupees I've amassed for once, but this is a tad excessive for the average player. Leave it to Tingle and his brothers to ruin a good thing. And yes, there are 4 of them now. A significant portion of a typical Wind Waker playthrough is spent sailing, but what, if anything, is gained from all this time at sea? It's easy to gloss over these interstitials when focusing on the story and dungeon progression, but a Wind Waker retrospective wouldn't be complete without giving some attention to the many hours spent on the open water. In case you haven't yet realized, you are currently viewing a Wind Waker retrospective, so let's do just that. To get the obvious out of the way, the slow traversal speed is a bit of a pain point. Conveniently placed fast travel points, courtesy of the Ballad of Gales and Cycloses' Cyclones, were absolutely necessary for this large-scale map to be even remotely practical to traverse, but they aren't a miracle solution. The calming atmosphere does some impressive heavy lifting, but can only support so much idle time. Random sea monster encounters and other inconsequential interactions amount to more of a nuisance than any sort of meaningful attempts to stave off the boredom. To be perfectly honest, during this most recent playthrough, I eventually developed the unfortunate habit of just setting my course and then checking my phone. That's how little there is to do while sailing between islands. And all too often, there isn't that much waiting for you on the islands themselves either. It's clear that Nintendo wanted to establish a grand scale to this ocean, understandably so, but then struggled to fill such a vast map with worthwhile content. Once you remove the few story-critical islands, the remainder mostly fall into recurring archetypes. Imagine the developers holding a set of stamps with which to fill out the 49 islands of the Great Sea. We've got the 3 Triangle Isles, the 5 Fairy Islands, and a whopping 6 reefs, all carbon copies of each other. Those reefs, ranging from the Cyclops Reef to the Six-Eye Reef, amount to nothing more than a repetitive naval combat arena. Even the first of these is more frustrating than fun. Your ship handles too clunkily for the precise movement required to dodge incoming cannonballs, and it's maddening how easily Link is knocked from his boat. Any potentially unique experience out at sea is shamelessly recycled to the point of meaninglessness. The memory of your first big Octo encounter is irreparably diluted by the 5 other Krakens you'll eventually face. It's difficult to muster any excitement upon boarding your 7th submarine, or your 100th lookout platform. With all the good stuff sucked into the Triforce hunt, which I maintain was the right decision, the best you can reasonably expect from a side island is some one-off minigame or puzzle. Of course, you wouldn't know there isn't much to discover until you've actually filled out a solid chunk of your sea chart, at which point the primal joy of checking off boxes takes over. Maybe it's just me, but I got a shocking amount of mindless satisfaction from spreading bait in each area and watching the map gradually fill in bit by bit. This effect was then repeated with the treasure charts. Between the 8 Triforce charts and the 41 standard treasure charts, each of the 49 grid cells of the Great Sea has some treasure to salvage. The sunken treasure can only ever be rupees, a heart piece, or a tracker for one of those copy-paste elements, like the big octos or great fairies. Almost universally, these treasure charts are found in the same spots you'd ordinarily expect rupees or heart pieces, an extra step for the same reward. Again though, once you realize there isn't going to be any special treasure at the X that marks the spot, the simple urge to check off all the charts and grid spaces has already firmly taken root. We can debate if the game really deserves kudos for exploiting this side of my brain, but the truth is I did find myself compelled to fully complete the sea chart. All that being said, I still value the Great Sea's inclusion. The moment-to-moment sailing and the mundane activities that populate it might leave something to be desired, but Wind Waker wouldn't be Wind Waker without all that comprises the Great Sea. So much of the game's identity is wrapped up in this side of the experience that I fear much would be lost if it was tightened or trimmed down. A bit of downtime and repetition is a small price to pay for a Zelda experience that dares to be different from the rest. Majora's Mask's paltry dungeon count was redeemed by the most meaningful side quests in the entire series, and it isn't even close. The emptiness of the Great Sea has already negated that possibility for Wind Waker, but Windfall Island often does remind me of Majora's Mask and how much care it demonstrates for even the smallest of characters. It's obviously primitive compared to what we are accustomed to today, but there is so much life to Windfall. A gang of schoolchildren torment their kind-hearted teacher, Miss Marie, until Link convinces them to make amends with her. Gossip abounds about the eccentric Pictobox fanatic Lenzo, and it's up to Link to set the record straight. By carefully observing their daily routine and the stolen glances they share, Link can play Cupid for two bashful lovebirds. In each of these scenarios, there is a distinct before and after state. The player's actions have a material impact on the island, and relationships evolve dynamically. This phenomena is best seen through the ongoing stories of Maggie and Mila, two young girls separated by class. Please indulge me for just a minute. Maggie and her father are the poorest family in all of Windfall, while Mila and her father are the wealthiest. Both girls are kidnapped in the same raids that captured Errol, and for a brief moment the fathers are united in a shared desperation. Once Tetra's crew deliver the girls to their fathers, at Mila's father's expense, the two families see their social standings reversed. Maggie, by chance, returned with a stash of valuable skull necklaces. Her dad eagerly sells them, seizing the opportunity to buy the auction house out from under Mila's now penniless father. This then sets the stage for two satisfying side quests. One in which Link secretly ferries love letters between Maggie and her Moblin suitor, a touch of Stockholm Syndrome perhaps. In the other, Link catches Mila in the act of petty theft, and imparts the value of honest work, something her father was incapable of doing. None of this ongoing side story is ever pushed on the player. It just unfolds quietly in the background. Fantastic stuff. Even the more static islanders are remarkably well realized and very memorable to me. Salvatore, the checked-out host of the Battleship minigame, is absolutely hilarious. His deadpan delivery completely upstages the game itself. The various characters all gather at the auction house each night to bid on special prizes. Wind Waker's talent for comedic animation shines brightly here. Zunari also initiates this game's trading sequence. It may be disappointingly simple compared to previous incarnations, but it's nice the Gorons are included in this small way, and I really enjoy decorating the town to my liking. It's amazing how dense the settlement is. There are so many meaningful characters, activities, and secrets packed into such a modestly sized location. My number one piece of advice for new players? Don't you dare ignore Windfall. Its surprising depth is criminally underrated, and it nearly single-handedly redeems Wind Waker's otherwise lackluster side quests. I may identify as a completionist at heart, but I do have some dignity, so let's turn our attention back to the main quest and finally put a bow on this thing. With the power of the Triforce of Courage flowing through his veins, Link descends to Sunken Hyrule one last time. Unfortunately, Ganondorf has also grown in strength since our last encounter. He breaches the castle's protection and kidnaps Princess Zelda in a rush to regression to the series' status quo, a heroic Link rescuing a sidelined princess. It's disappointing that the titular character is once again denied any action, and is instead reduced to a mere plot device. With the magical barrier down, Link can now explore the rest of the Sunken Kingdom. You can see why the king is so reluctant to let Hyrule fade. It really is a beautiful, featureless dirt path to Ganon's tower. Missed potential? You betcha. I've never been fond of the little gauntlets that precede the final bosses in these games. The 4 wings each draw inspiration from a previous dungeon, with an accompanying boss rematch, and thus come off as disjointed bits of recycled content rather than any sort of endgame escalation. The Phantom Ganon rematch that follows is an exception. The new phases to the fight make for a substantial improvement over the bare-bones Forsaken Fortress fight. There is even a little Lost Woods style puzzle solving. The inclusion of a dark portal to the lands above functions as a checkpoint, but more importantly helps ground this area as Ganon's home base rather than just a series of challenges. The final upgrade to the light arrows never fails to get me pumped up. As a divine weapon against evil and the sole means of weakening Ganon, they handily one-shot even the most powerful foes. The suspense is palpable as we finally come face to face with our nemesis, towering over the sleeping princess. The bold framing of these shots brings to mind the classic fairy tales that inspired the series and elevates the surrounding events to the legend promised by the game's title. These climactic fights against Ganon come across as an apology for the lackluster boss roster thus far. First up is a 3-phase bout against the shape-shifting puppet Ganon. The various transformations, including a marionette, a spider, and a snake, all have an off-puttingly grotesque yet goofy look to them. I'm not in love with the visual designs, but it is thematically appropriate. I interpret this fight as Ganon just toying with Link. He still doesn't see the boy from Outset as a threat worthy of a proper duel. The 3 transformations are very effective in keeping the fight varied and exciting throughout. Smooth transitions from one to the next maintains this as a singular fight, but each of these phases meets Wind Waker's admittedly low standards for a full boss. They all share a weakness to the light arrows, but the difficulty is in lining up that critical shot to the tail amid their chaotic movement. The snake form in particular stands out for demanding a level of precision the rest of the game never calls for. Having earned the right to face Ganondorf himself, we're offered a brief respite before the final confrontation. This unassuming climbing sequence is a strong reminder of how far this quest has taken Link. Unless you're squeamish about heights, make sure you look down from the upper platform to really appreciate the heights we've ascended. A little break from the action also allows for another serving of suspense, as we approach what awaits on the roof of the tower. You may feel the natural urge to skip through the obligatory villain monologue as quickly as possible to get to the final boss fight, but Ganondorf's musings here demand your attention. These are no mere theatrics, they are the key to understanding his character throughout the entire series. Ocarina of Time went to great lengths to humanize the beast Ganon into the now iconic Ganondorf, but stopped short of really digging into his motivation. This is a man who has spent several lifetimes in near isolation, reflecting on his rise and eventual fall as depicted in Ocarina. Humbled and surprisingly introspective, a previously one-note villain has grown beyond pure rage and hatred. Note that this fight omits the beast transformation entirely. Instead, we find ourselves face to face with a broken old man, defined by longing and sorrow more than anything. Contrasting the harshness of the Gerudo Desert with the lush green of Hyrule Field, he laments the unfair hand he's been dealt. Just as the winds had finally changed in his favor, the gods deemed an apocalyptic flood preferable to seeing him succeed. Of course, you and I remember the horrible reality of Ganondorf's reign, but he does deserve some small measure of sympathy, don't you think? Before Ganondorf can lay his hands on the newly assembled Triforce and restore Hyrule, our friend the king beats him to it and utters a most surprising wish: the final destruction of his own venerable kingdom. The floodwaters begin to fall, burying Ganondorf with all his hopes and dreams, not to mention Hyrule's legacy, once and for all. The final battle against Ganondorf is a breathtaking showstopper of a boss fight. The arena, a stage encircled by cascading water, brings with it theatrical qualities befitting the drama of Ganondorf's final stand. Zelda is given a long overdue active role, peppering Ganondorf with light arrows so Link can get a sword strike through his defenses. There are even hints of the long-dormant Tetra identity resurfacing. Her sheepish apology for oversleeping feels more like a quiet nod from the writers themselves. Ganondorf fights with a grace and ferocity that's mesmerizing to behold. The dual-wielding choreography even evokes his Gerudo heritage. After many back and forths, Zelda catches him by surprise with a reflected bolt of light, enabling Link to pull off possibly the most hype swordplay in the history of Hyrule. The shock value of Toon Link driving the Master Sword straight through Ganondorf's skull cannot be overstated, but the way his corpse forms a stone pedestal, barely resembling a man, is what lingers with me. It's so poetic that Ganondorf himself, frozen in defiance, acts as a monument to the Hyrule that has passed, a relic of a bygone era that refused to die. King Daphnes, as Ganondorf's foil, also sought to preserve the ancient kingdom, but he ultimately recognized the need to pass on the torch to the next generation. It's time to start over and pave a new future. When writing these large-scale retrospective projects, it's easy to get lost in nitpicking the little things and lose sight of the bigger picture, so let's take a minute to refocus before we wrap up. Wind Waker may fall short of perfection, but its triumphs far outweigh its failures. Those flaws only stand out when held up in comparison to its legendary siblings, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, both masterpieces by any metric. It's only fair we cut Wind Waker some slack. I have my issues with the dungeon design, but that's magnifying one small slice of the game at the expense of the largely successful whole. Even when limited by development constraints, the Great Sea is a remarkably fresh setting with a unique appeal. Not only is this the best version of Link, but I'd declare it's the best incarnation of Ganondorf as well. And while Tetra is in play, you've got the triple threat. I've tried to avoid obsessing over the visuals because frankly they speak for themselves. The staff credits theme, a medley of the various tunes that fill Wind Waker's soundscape, is my #1 favorite Zelda track in the entire series. I've always been bothered by the number of players that seem to overlook the depth Zelda's stories can hold. I hope I've managed to convince you that Wind Waker is among the best of the bunch in that department. I can't speak for players of the day, but to me it feels like this game was intended as a soft reboot for the series. I have a high admiration for such a bold vision, delivering a new tone and new world while still paying homage to what came before. We close with Link and Tetra setting sail into uncharted waters, opening the doors to an exciting future for the Legend of Zelda. I want to sincerely thank you for joining me on this voyage through a game that I hold very close to my heart. It's admittedly not my favorite Zelda game, but I honestly can't imagine the series without it. Please, take the time to chime in with your own thoughts and memories. The best part about making these videos is the opportunity to share my love for the series with like-minded viewers, and hearing all sorts of different perspectives in return. Of course, putting together a video of this size is no walk in the park, and I'm incredibly grateful to my Patreon supporters for their generous contributions to my work here. Axel Dieker and Andreas Schouten, you guys rule. Even if you choose not to donate, I am extremely appreciative of the time you've spent with me today, and I truly hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you, and until next time, take care.